I'm
Long
good.
no see.
Apologies for being just a tad late. I was supposed to be on a few minutes ago, but the meeting went long.
Oh, off, off, off.
Wouldn't be the first time that's happened.
Yeah. So, some of the people we joined from Zoom. Most of people they joined from the YouTube live streaming.
Okay.
Let me see.
So I'm going to do a quick test on sharing my screen just to see if I
Sure.
can get it to work properly. Let's see. This is the usual problem. I have a million tabs and I can't find the one that I want to show.
It happens.
This is, there it is.
Yeah.
All right. So
3 of the meeting. We have day 1, day 2 hybrid mode in Palo Alto and also in Shenzhen. Now we have the honor to have Ving to give us the keynote. Which I guess everybody know Ving. Is one of the fathers of the internet, inventor of TCP/IP and Turing Award receiver. So please welcome Ving Sir.
well, thank you, Tina. And first of all, I hope I'm audible and visible. I'm in my office in Reston, Virginia, and I'm going to share my screen and talk for a little while. But I'm much more interested in having a chance to learn more about what you're trying to do, and how I might be able to help. So let's go to sharing screen. We will find our
I love the title.
Tina, I've run into a problem here. It looks like I'm not able to keep my microphone on when I'm sharing the screen.
I can hear your voice.
Can you well, as soon as I shared my screen, an error came up saying that your microphone has been muted until you stop sharing.
Yeah, sorry, my dog wants to say something. Yeah.
I'll try again, but here's
Mhm.
I had this happen once before where you try to share the screen and the microphone is blocked. I'll try one more time.
Okay. Otherwise, you can send the slides to me. I share for you, and you talk.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay, it's refusing to let me open the mic. That's crazy. Why would it do that?
Yeah, you're using Mac, right?
I'm I'm sorry. I'm using the share screen feature,
Oh.
but it explicitly says on the display your microphone is blocked while you're sharing the screen. It must be assuming that the presentation has audio in it, and so they're blocking my microphone.
Oh, that makes sense. Okay.
Well,
So
it may make sense, but it's twisted sense if you ask me.
this is one of the alligator.
If those of you who've been doing video conferencing for the last 2 years will recognize this as a common problem, that things don't always work the way they're supposed to. So let's see, Tina, I suppose I can try to send you the slides.
Yes.
But do we not know how to force the microphone back on? I mean, as the host,
Anybody know? We have a lot of hard engineers on the call.
Is there, here, wait.
Probably permissions for Zoom. Somewhere. Is this your first time in Zoom or no?
Wow. So, well, while we're trying to figure that out, let me try to send this to Tina. Wow, what a pain in the neck.
Maybe trying to restart your computer.
Oh, really? Do you think that would make a difference?
Sometimes, it
No,
works. In my
I
case,
will
I'm
try
not a
that.
technical person, and
Yeah. Well, the thing is, it's a very explicit error message. It says very clearly, we're turning your microphone off while you're sharing your screen, and we'll turn it back on when you stop sharing. And my reaction is, well, how the hell am I supposed to present if I can't have a microphone?
but just
I'm not
for
sure if it's going to help, but when you share, there is a checkbox share sound. Is there
Oh, really? Okay.
at the bottom? Is it on?
Okay, I will look for that. Stand by. I'll try one more time to share.
At the bottom of the share screen.
Yeah.
with an arrow, up,
Let's see. I'm only.
just in the middle.
Oh, I see. Share tab audio. I see what you're saying. Okay, here we go. Let's try this again. Can you see the screen?
Yes, and we can hear
Yes.
you.
And you can hear me too. Thank you. I did not notice that little share screen audio. Fascinating. Thank you for that. You might say you're not technical, but you did pretty well. So, you get gold stars for that. All right.
I am technical. So.
Yeah. So +1, we got +1 for the alligators. So look, I just wanted to spend some time telling you a little bit about the kind of alligators that I've been wrestling with for the last nearly 50 years. Let's just start out by making an observation. This is my life lesson number 206. Everything is more complicated. I guarantee you, the closer you look at anything, the more complicated it gets. By the way, we just had a small experience with that. So just keep that in mind as you do your work day to day. Now, this is what the internet started out as an experiment in packet switching way back in 1969. And so we've gone from that to this over the past nearly 50 years now. And the reason I wanted to put this one up is just to reinforce a couple of points. The first one is that there are literally tens of thousands of networks that make up the internet today. And they are all operated independently. They all have potentially different business models. They are not required to connect to anyone in particular. They get to decide who they will interconnect with and on what terms and conditions. Sometimes there's money changing hands. Most of the time, there is no money changing hands, and it's a peering relationship. And in some cases, you'll find that the interconnections happen at internet exchange points, which facilitate the interconnection of a large number of different networks to make things more efficient. So it's pretty astonishing that that this works. And part of the reason it works is everybody is using the same set of protocols. They've all agreed to collaborate in the use of the TCP/IP protocol suite. So so that's just sort of where we are. And now let's just talk a little bit about privacy and security, because these are two things that I hope you care about, and I certainly do as well. And when you get right down to it, what's security about? It's mostly about access control. And in order to have access control, you have to decide, well, who is it that wants access? And should I give it to them or not? How do I identify them? How do I confirm who they are? And then once I have a confirmation of who they are, then what authority should they have? And so authentication now becomes a very important component of access control. And I'm sure, I hope anyway, that a lot of you have concluded that one of the alligators in the internet is the inability to use passwords effectively because people pick bad passwords or they use the same password for everything. And at Google, we've been encouraging people to use two-factor authentication, either with small devices that you can plug into a port on your laptop, or maybe it's the use of your mobile for an alternative path for second authentication. I'm a big fan, frankly, of strong authentication using public key crypto, um, and would recommend that strongly to anyone who's trying to assure that they are authenticating someone before they get access to information that they're interested in. And enforcement of the access control, of course, involves all kinds of things, software and hardware. Those of you who are down in the guts of these things know about the ability to control whether or not you can read, write, or execute from particular parts of memory as an example of hardware reinforced security. I'm a big fan of melding hardware and software together to wrestle that particular alligator to the ground. And then finally, I would argue that even if we build all of those interventions into the system in order to increase security, we need still to keep track of who did what and when in order to figure out if something has been penetrated, can we figure out when that happened and who did that. So auditing and review of logs is really an important adjunct to all the other security measures that you might introduce. And finally, I'm sure all of you are very familiar with the idea of defense in depth. So you can imagine introducing a variety of mechanisms to enforce access control. Link level encryption, for example, in addition to end-to-end encryption, is not an uncommon tactic, especially in military settings. For instance, the use of digital signatures is really valuable if it's important to know, first of all, that the object you're looking at has not been altered, and second, something about its provenance and who, where it came from, and can we authenticate the digital object by looking at the digital signature and seeing with the chain of certificate authorities that have been used to enforce the digital signature. At Google, we've come to the conclusion that no network is ever absolutely secure. And so we start from the presumption that all networks, including our own, have already been compromised. And so we build additional mechanisms on an end-to-end basis that we call Beyond Corp as a way of protecting information, even if the network is potentially compromised. So we don't assume, for example, that just because you access something from a corporate network, that you're physically on the premises, you're inside, so to speak. We still assume that that we need additional authentication and cryptographic methods in order to protect the access to the system's resources. So let's go to the next slide. I think that privacy and confidentiality are extremely important, especially in this day and age when so much information is flying around and potentially is exposed. And so looking at doing something to protect privacy and confidentiality is very much a responsibility that you should feel. And of course, it's an alligator to wrestle with. We've already talked a little bit about access control, and you can see the triumvirate there, which is who is it, what authentication have I been able to apply, and then what authorizations do parties have for access to information. And then the use of cryptography. We've done three things with cryptographic methods at Google. One of them is to encrypt traffic when it's in transit, for example, either from the user to our data center or from one data center to another. But we've also concluded that information in our data centers needs to be encrypted even when it's at rest. And the reason for that is that we experienced a compromise some 10 years ago in which unencrypted information was exposed to an unauthorized party. And so we chose to encrypt everything that's on our storage systems. And I'll mention another form of cryptographic protection called essentially confidential computing when we get to the end of this slide. The other thing which is critical here with regard to privacy and confidentiality is whether or not there are legal frameworks in which actions can be taken in order to cope with someone whose information has been inappropriately accessed. So you want to have tools both to redress a failure of protection, but also, I would say, to discourage unauthorized access by saying that if you do these things, there will be consequences. And so here, I think it's important that we pursue legal frameworks that will create a disincentive for parties to get access to confidential information that they shouldn't have. And there are some implications of that from an international point of view, because as all of you know, the internet is global in scope. The consequences are that some harmful behaviors can occur in one jurisdiction, but the victim may be in another. And in the absence of international agreements to enforce some of these protections, it's hard to track down the perpetrators. So we are going to, I would say, we are going to have to build up a better collection of international agreements in order to track down people who are committing cyber crimes, because otherwise the jurisdictions are not overlapping and we can't track them down. There are already, we talked about technical protection to prevent information from being inappropriately accessed, and the logging and auditing we've also talked a bit about. Let me just mention confidential computing as an interesting technical development. At Google, we concluded that there are some customers who would like not only to have their information encrypted while it's in transit and while it's at rest, but they also would like to have the software that they're going to run also be encrypted so that no one other than themselves can see what that software is. And so we've developed a capability with the help of special purpose hardware that allows us to ingest encrypted software, encrypted in a key that only the processor and our customer knows. So the processor generates keys, sends the keys to the customer encrypts everything, including the software. The software is loaded into our system in encrypted form. When it is brought into the processor and into the cache, it gets decrypted for execution, but as soon as any information leaves the cache, leaves the processor and goes back into random access memory, it gets re-encrypted again in a key that we at Google don't have access to. And so this is intended to give multiple protections to the customers who wishes to protect not only software or not only the data, but also the software that they're using on our cloud system. Well, there are some hazards which we all need to be conscious of, and in order to effectively end up with a successful security framework. One of them is making sure that you have backup for any keys that you need in order to get access to privileged information. And so you need to have built in mechanisms for preserving the keys. And you also need recovery procedures for the case where the key has been lost. And I've just been through a couple of cycles of that on a laptop whose password I forgot. And there were some extremely large and keys that were made available by the folks who configured the laptop so that in extremis I could get help to get access to the laptop again. So backups and recovery procedures for loss of keys is very important in the design process. I could go on and on about buggy code, but I'll just tell you that primarily the reason we have security problems is code which is penetratable because of mistakes made by programmers. Unfortunately, even though we've been programming collectively for 80 plus years, we still don't know how to write code that doesn't have bugs. So the consequence of that is that we need much better tools for dealing with bugs and fixing bugs. That raises one other little problem, and that's how to deal with updates. Because if we found a bug, we certainly want to fix it. But the device that's going to ingest the new software has to know where did it come from, and does the update have integrity? Has it not been altered in transit? And so once again, digital signatures and encryption may turn out to be very important tools for doing secure updates of software in order to correct for mistakes that have been found. However, not all those bugs get fixed in time. And so there are people who discover the bugs and then make use of them. Those of you who've been watching in the recent past know about the log4j bug, which has been around for decades, apparently, and only recently exploited. And now, of course, we hope largely fixed. But those malware exploits are extremely powerful negative tools. They are very harmful, especially ransomware, which I'm sure you're all well aware has had cascade failure effects. So the Colonial Pipeline, as an example, not only was the data that they needed in order to run the business encrypted, but they had to shut the business down because they didn't have enough data in order to operate the system. And that, of course, had a huge cascade effect on the east coast of the US, where fuel was less and less available for a period of almost a week. And so there were a lot of shutdowns. I don't even think the ransomware guys realized the consequences of what they were doing. But we need to be very concerned about that because more and more of our society is dependent on software and on devices that are animated by that software or are networked on the internet. And so this is turning out to be just a super important area for attention. And the worst case, of course, is the insider one, because that's where somebody is fully authorized to have access to information and then abuses that privilege. And once again, auditing and logging can be your friend here, keeping track of what people are looking at and noticing, for example, that an unusual pattern has emerged where someone has gotten access to large amounts of data, which is somehow not consistent with the work that they're supposed to be doing. That kind of auditing is very important. And it's also important for us to train our colleagues, our co-workers, to detect that someone is trying to get you to do something that's inappropriate. A classic example is somebody calls the system administrator in a panic saying that the customer is screaming at him and the world is coming to an end and doesn't have access to the particular thing that he needs in order to fix the problem, and can you please give me the password? We need to learn to resist that kind of attack, social engineering attack, in order to protect against insider threats. And I would say more generally that the general public needs to be more aware of these hazards and be more aware of the responses that you can have, tools that you can use in order to prevent them. So we owe it to the general public to be more forthcoming about the risks and hazards of being online and the practices that they can adopt in order to make themselves more secure. So there's some unfinished business, I think. This is the last slide. There is some unfinished business which I believe we need to attend to. I mentioned earlier that when you have someone who commits a crime, a cyber crime in one jurisdiction, and the victim is in another, it's not clear how to go after the perpetrator unless there is some kind of international agreement on about what is a crime and an agreement to assist in the tracking down of the perpetrators. So I'm actually coming to the conclusion that absolute anonymity is not necessarily in our best interest, and that just like a license plate, for example, is usually just a random string of characters. There are some parties in the police department, for example, who have the authority to pierce the veil of that license plate to find out who owns the car. And I would argue that for identifiers that we use to identify ourselves, even if they appear on the surface to be not bound to any particular individual, that there probably have to be parties who have the authority to penetrate that veil and identify who is this party. This might apply to a domain name registration, for example, or it might apply to a username in some system that isn't obvious who owns it, but which information is available upon showing appropriate authority to obtain that data. I think that's traceability, I would call it, by design, and I believe that we really need that. But we also need to limit access except to parties who have the authority to get access to that. And sometimes that might mean a court order of some kind. I also believe that we will have to collaborate and cooperate to develop those frameworks for mutual support in enforcing the rules. But I want to encourage you to keep in mind something called the rule and role of informality. Those of you who know about the Conflictor Worm Group will know that when it was formed to respond to this particular piece of malware, the decision was made not to create a formal working group, but to simply invite anyone who had something useful to say to participate. And the value of that informality was that you didn't have a bunch of rules that prevented people who could usefully engage from being part of the working group. So it turned into an extremely powerful enabling mechanism that has allowed that group to identify not necessarily the source, but at least the functionality of that particular worm. And again, this gets back to information sharing, helping each other with indications and warnings. And some of you will have noticed that the CISA group of the Department of Homeland Security has been encouraging more government and private sector cooperation and collaboration and sharing of information related to cyber attacks and cyber vulnerabilities, so as to increase our ability to engage and to defend against some of the potential hazards. And last point I want to make, I realize I've run a little longer than we intended, is to say that we, I think, now have a burden, those of us who produce software, we have a burden, an ethical burden, to make sure that that software isn't abused, and to try to make sure that where there are bugs and mistakes, that those bugs get fixed, and that we help people protect themselves against potential hazards resulting from buggy software. So those are just a few ideas that I think that might be worth your being aware of, and I will stop sharing and come back now to our previous program and ask whether or not you'd like to have a further discussion. And I see that Oleg has found a typo there. Oh, okay, thank you. It wasn't Reagan. It's
Sorry, I couldn't.
Provarai, no Provarai. Thank you.
Correct, yes.
Yes, thank you for that. I will repair that mistake. I appreciate it.